Hey everyone, Josh Neighbors here, Locked On Big 12 podcast. On today's show, Stephen Simcox of Locked On Horned Frogs joins us. We do our TCU 2022 season in review. Look back on a season for the Horned Frogs that led to a national championship appearance. We look forward to the future for TCU and kind of where the program is right now. That is all coming up on today's show.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, Josh Neighbors here with Stephen Simcox. Today's show is brought to you all by the folks at the FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America, official sports betting partner of the NFL. Make every moment matter more with the folks at FanDuel. Make sure you guys follow both Stephen and I on Twitter. I'm at Josh Neighbors. You can follow Stephen at Simcox Stephen. You guys can find both shows wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Please subscribe to both channels. It means a lot to us when you guys do like the videos, leave your comments as well. Stephen, we've had some time to decompress from the well, actually not really, because they've been the Kendall Bryles hire kind of got us going again, and then also Jaden Rashada, who we'll get to. But looking back on the TCU season as a graduate of the school, and then also as somebody who covered the team from pillar to post, give me your thoughts, your feelings about what was a pretty special year.
Well, I mean, it was incredible. You know, the ending was what it was. It was about like worst case scenario. If you make the national championship game, how badly could it go? Well, that's what happened against Georgia. But I mean, I think when I look back on it later, I'll remember beating Michigan in the Fiesta Bowl, right? Like going 12-0 during the regular season, having all those amazing wins, escaping against Baylor, escaping against teams like Texas Tech, having a big win in Austin against Texas when everyone sort of thought that would be the week that the run came to an end. Just an outstanding job by Sonny Dykes, right? Like it was kind of the perfect storm. Like the league was sort of up for grabs. They became the team that took the ball and ran with it. Max Duggan took a huge step forward. We all know his story. He didn't win the job coming out of camp and then sort of immediately took over when Chandler Morris went down. They found a way to maximize the skill talent that they had had on campus for a few years. Guys like Quentin Johnston and Kendre Miller. I think Joe Gillespie did a good job, getting that defense to a place where they were, more than serviceable for most of the season. And now the big question is, can you sustain this, right? Because there were a lot of things that, fell into place. They were sort of at the top of their development cycle at a lot of different positions. It was a down year for some of the big powers in the Big 12. And they took advantage of that opportunity. And so now there's a target on your back, and you have to find a way to kind of climb the mountain again. But, I mean, I think you'll always just look back with this team in a lot of fondness and the toughness they played with, the intensity, the way they, pulled out close games. And, it kind of all culminated in a great way with that win against Michigan. And that's what I'll choose to remember most fondly from the season, is them just breaking through, making the playoff, and then advancing in the national championship game.
Since 1995, they were in 5 different conferences. In 95, they were in the Southwest Conference. Mm-hmm. Then they were in the WAC from 96 to 2000, 01 to 04 in the Conference USA, Mountain West from 2005, 2011, and then they arrived in the Big 12. And I think arriving is like the right word, because there were a lot of moments where TCU was kind of arriving in different ways. You know what I mean? Just kind of like on the scene. I think obviously there was the arrival of them was like kind of the next version of a Boise State, right? With the Rose Bowl perfect season, beating Wisconsin. And then there was, the year where they nearly obviously missed the playoff because of the Big 12's one true champion policy, which screwed them because they had multiple champions. And obviously they didn't get in that year. But I think there was GP's now getting the chance to do the Power 5 league. It's to be reckoned with. And then obviously, I think Gary Patterson, for as much credit as he deserves for getting this, this program to where it is, clearly Jeremiah Donati made the right call, right? With getting rid of him. Sonny Dykes comes in. And then I think having a different coach do it, especially in his first year, was huge. Now, you do it with a lot of Gary's players. I think it's also part of it. Like that's the modern college football part of it, is that he made a group of guys who a lot of them could have gone elsewhere, believe they could do it where they were, gave them a second lease on life. And that's a whole lot of, I guess their football lives in some ways. That's a whole lot of what the transfer portal is nowadays too. And, re-recruiting those guys, nailing the portal the way he did. I think this was like this, the version 3.0 arrival, if you will, because of the way that they hit the portal and, kept guys from going into the portal. Having a different coach doing it, I think, meant a lot, because it's a lot of times that's the tough part, right? Following the guy who was the guy, that can be difficult. And Sonny Dykes did a pretty flawless job.
It was a massive statement because, the big question when Gary's team started to sort of fall off a cliff was, well, he is TCU football in the modern era. So could somebody else come in and replicate what he did? And he did it in such a specific way, recruiting at a high level by finding guys that were undervalued or underrated, getting them on campus, turning them into really good defensive players after, spending a few years under his system. And now we know that college football is really completely different. It's really hard to do that. It's hard to bring in a player, even if he's a 3-star, maybe kind of an under the radar guy, and sell him on, sit for a couple of years. We'll integrate you into what we're doing here. And so Sonny came in and did things differently. I think, he capitalized on some of the speed and toughness that was left over on this roster. And he also did a really nice job of plugging in those holes in the roster, like you talked about in the transfer portal, by finding some guys who maybe weren't the biggest names, but made a lot of sense for what they were trying to do. And it came together in a big way. So yeah, it's huge that they've found success with somebody who doesn't have a statue on campus, because it means there's some staying power here potentially. And there's a kind of a new wave coming in. I think some of the fresh ideas he's brought to the table have made a huge difference. And the players were obviously like, the old regime had just gotten stale. I think that's fair to say.
Right.
That voice wasn't, carrying the same weight as it did through so much of GP's tenure. So it was a breath of fresh air. It was the right hire. And it's a big step forward for TCU football, because it means that there's potential here outside of, just what Gary built, which was so significant for the school.
And I'm wearing my Big 12 shirt today, so I do want to mention like the significance for the league, because, we've had so many conversations about, will there be a breakaway, right? The Power 2 leagues take, will they take like Clemson and FSU and Miami and go away or whatever? And look, that still might happen, but I think there'd be a lot of people who'd be like, well, could we just go away and leave a play, leave like a TCU on the cutting room floor, not to come with whatever happened? I mean, they have to be respected, because that is a team from the Big 12 that made a national championship. OU is going to go along with whatever happened, they'll Texas, right? Texas and OU, and they were going to the SEC. I mean, those two schools never accomplished that. And so I think for them, once again, to be this conference hopping program, then to get to this point, for TCU football now to go to a national championship, and look, I once again didn't go well, but you can't take away the fact that they went and they beat Michigan in the game they never trailed in. Significant, I think it was not like, once again, I don't like the underdog thing, because they were like, what was it, 7.5 point underdogs? They closed against Michigan, like that. We've seen a lot of games where 7.5 point underdogs. TCU did it twice this year, right? They as 7.5 point underdogs, Texas being the first time. So I think we have to mention like that in there as well. But I just think the significance of having a school like that, having a team like that do it, shows that not diamonds in the rough, but like this is not just the haves and the have-nots. Maybe when it comes down to the final games of the year, when it's Georgia and it's Alabama, it's LSU's and their superhero years, whatever those look like, it's those schools. But there can be breakthroughs from other places, which I think is very important narrative-wise.
Well, and to do it, during the era of the 4-team playoff too, because we all know like the 12-team playoff is coming. There's going to be more access. We're assuming there's going to be some sort of kind of automatic bid for a conference champion, but to do it when the club is more exclusive and in a season where you didn't go undefeated. You lost a game to K-State in the Big 12 championship game. That was sort of the last data point the committee had. They still respected the body of work enough put them in, and then they went and won the game. And yeah, there's a big gap, I mean, between like the Georgias and the Alabamas of the world and everybody else. But I think we saw pretty plainly in the Fiesta Bowl that Michigan was not this team that was just, maybe they didn't take TCU seriously enough, but they weren't so talented that they could play their B game or their C game and get away with winning that football game. I mean, if not for some breakdowns defensively, that might have been more of a blowout. So a big deal for TCU to win that game. And I think the Big 12 has a lot to build on right now. There's some good programs here that have done some nice things recently. And maybe Texas and OU leaving, even though I know from a monetary standpoint it's going to be a big hit. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise competition-wise, because it'll allow these schools to sell themselves better in the Big 12 and hopefully have more playoff breakthroughs moving forward.
Quick word from our sponsors, then we'll talk about the future of TCU football. Today's show is brought to you guys by the FanDuel Sportsbook, as I mentioned before. We're really excited to have them on as a new partner. They've got so many features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Also, I think their interface is by far the best of any of the sports gambling apps that are out there. Right now, new customers can join today and get $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. They've got player props. They've got point spreads. They've got first half odds. They've got season long odds. You guys can also combine your bets in single game parlays for a bigger payout as well. So once again, go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Place your first $5 wager and get $150 in free bets, win or lose. Once again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL. So, Steven, I think, we go from the season there, and then we go to how well they've done recruiting and the fact they're pulling guys out of the portal, from Alabama and places like that that are getting, I think the word we have to use is recruited over, right? Like, even a guy like an 8, and the thing is, that does not mean they're bad now. It doesn't mean they're going to be Alabama caliber players. It does not mean they're bad, right? I think A.D. Mitchell's a good example, kind of a guy who got, I know he played well towards the end, but like, that's a guy who kind of got recruited over, right? And I don't think he loved his target share when he was at Georgia. So now he's going to Texas, and we know Georgia's offense, they prefer the Brock Bowers and Darnell Washingtons and Lad McConkey sometimes over the star guys in the outs. Jermaine Burton, another guy who wasn't really getting the looks that he wanted there. So TCU recruiting at that clip. And then we talked about the Kendall Briles thing a good amount. I think here's the story on this, is that we've talked about the stuff with him, with his past at Baylor and whatnot. Putting that aside, like, I think it's important we talked about it because I think he's going to score a lot of points, and he scores a lot of points in a lot of places. The fact that TCU now is now at a point where they're doing things like pulling a sitting SEC offensive coordinator, and they're now in the mix for a guy like a Jaden Rashada, which is, that's not a type of player TCU could normally go after. But after a season like this and poaching a guy like a Kendall Briles, seeing the success of a KJ Jefferson under him, I mean, I think we're not all the way to Kingmaker yet, but Sonny Dykes has a little bit of the kind of magic dust right now. And it seems like they can go after a lot more than I think what, we thought was possible before, maybe.
They have some juice at the moment. And I mean, I think from a recruiting standpoint, they're probably going to sign a top 20 class here with the high school guys. There's one safety, Warren Robertson.
Yeah, we're at right now. I'll just for some context, 24/7 has them at 22 overall. The composite rank is 19. The transfer rank's 18. So they're doing so you put it all together, it's top 20 class when you add in the transfers.
And the Rashada situation is fascinating. I think what the national title run and this new staff have done well so far is they're signing good players. They're also getting in the conversation for some guys that they typically wouldn't really get the time of day from. When Walker Howard hit the portal, they were in that mix before Ole Miss signed him. They were kind of – the Austin Novosad situation was strange. He was committed to Baylor for a long time. He flips to Oregon's last minute. Apparently there were like some last-minute visits from Garrett Riley that, the conversations didn't really go too far, but they were at least talking with him, towards the end of that recruitment cycle. And when I first heard the news about Rashada, my first thought was, well, I mean, if he's still, kind of looking at NIL and making that a priority. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just don't really feel like TCU is going to be a school that, backs up the Brinks truck for a high school QB. But you look at the teams that they're competing with, Arizona State, Cal, Washington, possibly Colorado. From a football perspective, they've got a really, good selling point. I mean, they're coming off a national championship appearance. They've developed quarterbacks well. Sonny Dykes has, Kendall Browse has. And so if they land him, then that's a game changer. And you have to find a way to get the results on the field. But, I mean, you talked about the transfers. You're getting guys like Tommy Brockermeyer, Trey Sanders, JoJo Earl from Alabama. Yeah, they're technically getting sort of reevaluated through this process, but coming out of high school, these were 4- and 5-star recruits, like nationwide top guys. And that's been a huge thing that Sonny Dykes did well at SMU too, was like, hey, if you're a Dallas-Fort Worth kid and it didn't work out for you at SEC School X or, wherever you went, then just come home and you can come home and play and you can be close to family and friends and we'll get you set up. And so that's been a really good thing for them as far as the portal goes. There's significant juice right now for this program. They're getting talent, they're acquiring talent, they're having conversations with players that they haven't had before. And so it still comes down to, like, at the end of the day, the trenches have to get better. I think that was the biggest kind of glaring difference between them and Georgia in that game, on that Monday night. But they're starting the process. And so now can you find a way to keep the results on the field at a high level with all the roster turnover so that you're still in these conversations a year from now? Because we kind of saw Baylor go through this, Oklahoma State go through this, where they were at the top. It looked like they were starting to find some guys that they normally wouldn't. I think TCU is bumping that up to a higher level.
Right.
But then they have one bad season, and then all of a sudden a lot of people are in the portal, and how many scholarship quarterbacks do we have left on this roster? Not that many. So it's a very fickle thing. You have to keep winning, but there's a foundation here to have success for the long term.
Yeah, that's kind of the next direction I think we have to head this, because, K-State's bringing back a lot of their guys, and like I no matter how well it goes for them, I still believe that, and I might be wrong, I still believe K-State's a place where it's like 7-5, 8-4. You keep it there every 3 or 4 years. We're talking 10-2, 11-1, and actually for them it was 9-3 this year. I think they had such a weird year. I mean, with the Martinez and Howard thing, and the multiple setbacks. But TCU to me is different. Is in a different position, and I kind of talked about this the other day. Like, if I had to pick schools from the new Big 12 that I could see playing a national championship game when you expand to 12, because here's the thing, it's going to get harder, right? Like, because you're going to have to beat a Michigan, but then you're going to have to beat like a Clemson before you get to an LSU or whatever it is, right? Because, let's just say, I mean, TCU this year, Stephen, they would have had to play 4 games, right? Because they would have not gotten the automatic bid because they didn't win the league, right? So they're playing the round of 12, then the round of 8, then 4, just to get to the title. They'd have to win 3 games, right? And so, like, it gets much more daunting when you think of it that way. That's the crazy part about this. But the one thing I'll also say is, like, they are now uniquely positioned to start getting like Sonny Dykes. Say whatever we want about the hire of Kendall Browse, did not love it. And this, if he wants to coach there for a long time, I actually have some questions about how long he wants to coach. But he's going to have to replace coordinators. He's going to have to get new talent. But so far, like, they're kind of checking those boxes. Like, this is, as far as regression goes, sure, they're going to lose a lot of guys, but you look at the types of players that they're bringing in. JoJo Earl was like, I forget what number he was. That was like an incredibly high recruit, right?
Yeah.
Brockermeyer is a guy that, it's really.
Yeah, he's like number 2 in the country coming out of high school. I mean,
right. These are like, even if they suck, they're like still decent level players. And so that's why I think, once again, the question is results next year. I've got a lot of questions about results, but that's the thing is, can you not go 7-5, 6-6, like we saw Baylor and Oklahoma State do? We saw OU and Iowa State both fall off years, the year later for them to. OU was close to making the Big 12 title last year. They didn't ultimately make it, and they had even bigger fall. That is a problem in this league right now. As fun as it is, as much churning and excitement as that is, if we want to win a championship, we need teams to stay at the top, because that means that they are, like you said, acquiring, retaining, and continuing to add talent.
Well, and everybody, it's the question that we've really debated since OU and Texas left. Everybody has their sales pitch for why. Okay, we're the next man up. Like we're the team that takes the spot of the big boys, takes the spot of the bully in the conference. But yeah, I think TCU has as good of an argument as anybody. The location's fantastic. You're right there in a very talent-rich state, talent-rich metroplex. Great facilities, investing a lot, and then that is the key. Like I think Sonny has a really good eye for talent. I mean, you look at the staffers that he's hired, and you look at the guys he's lost
on field and with coaching too. Like both those places,
yes. And with the coaching hires, like the guys he's lost, Rashad Samples went to the Rams. Like he doesn't even make it to the fall. Outside linebackers coach, who I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name right now, but he gets hired by Georgia before the season started last season. Garrett Riley goes to Clemson. Brian Carrington, their recruiting coordinator, he has a really good year here at TCU, and now he's a position coach at Arizona State. And he's replaced those guys with other young coaches who have fit the bill so far. So I think he's got a good eye for talent. I think he understands how to be a CEO and kind of have a hands-off approach, let people do their jobs well. And yeah, I think this is a team that can, fundamentally be a contender year in and year out. But it just, my big question for Sonny is, what happens when you hit adversity? Like you have really had a starter kit of just all rainbows and sunshine since you took over. You go 12-0 the regular season, you have a hiccup in the Big 12 title game, you win your playoff game, you get blasted in the national title game, but they haven't lost 2 in a row yet. I mean, they have, like, what happens if Chandler Morris doesn't turn out to be the guy they think he is? How do you adjust, right? What happens if this O-line, which is replacing 3 of their 5 starters, struggles at the beginning of the year? How do you adjust? If you blow a tire against Colorado to start the year, how do you recover? That's what, the best do really well. I'll be curious to see how Sonny handles it. But I think, they're in for it for the long haul. The athletic department wants to be good. And, you mentioned something else that's interesting. I've kind of hinted at it, but Sonny is kind of a job hopper. It's not like a bad thing. I mean, he's just like he's kind of hopped around. And I think TCU is a place where you want to stay for a long time. But that's kind of the final piece here. Is this where he sees himself like fully maximizing what he can do as a coach, or is there always that other job, other opportunity that could be, lurking out there that he'd be interested in?
Yeah, I mean, like he's not young. How old is he? What, 50?
In his 50s, yeah.
50s. And once again, the Kendall Briles hiring, I think it's going to work out just fine. I think it's, the outside stuff is much warranted. We should be talking about it, but I think it's going to work out well. I don't think Joe Gillespie is going to be around much longer. I can tell you that. I mean, maybe they have a bad year on defense, but I think also a second year, especially if they retain, I think they're going to have a good chunk of the defense back, I believe.
They will.
Yeah. I mean, and that's great because I think he can actually start doing a bit more with the defense right now. Those guys have kind of mastered the system and whatnot. So that's exciting. I guess the one thing that we'll get out here on this is really important. Like quarterback for next year, they, like you mentioned, Austin Novosad sniffing around, Walker Howard sniffing around, Jaden Rashada now sniffing around. It is a talent acquisition business. They lose Sam Jackson, right? I think he went to the portal.
He headed to the Cal.
Yeah, right. Which was really interesting. That was really interesting. It sounds like it's Chandler Morris. Now, I will say, the thing about Kendall Briles' offense specifically, that is a distribution offense. Mm-hmm. Think about what the quarterbacks are asked to do in that offense. It's a lot of running. It's a decent amount of running. It's really based off the run the offenses. But for passer, think about Hendon Hooker is not asked to get through a million reads, right? It is a lot of one read and go. It's a lot of spread the field, which I think actually is pretty good considering the athletes are bringing at wide receiver. So this makes it curious. I think they wanted a little version of that when they picked Chandler Morris this year, trigger man, right? He is a trigger man. He's supposed to get the ball out. They got Max Duggan and it ended up being great for them. But I think much like this year, distribution is going to be the big key, especially in a Kendall Briles offense when it comes to just getting the ball out, being on time, making the throws where you need to make them, because it does require you to throw the ball all over the field.
Yeah, it's really weird. I have trouble articulating how I feel about this. I think – when I envisioned Chandler taking over next year, when I first started thinking about it, I was like, okay, I thought this team would be coming off like an 8-4 season, and it would be like, oh yeah, Chandler Morris can step in, kind of keep the good vibes going, and now he's stepping in after what Max did, which was a national championship appearance. But you're right. I feel like this is the type of player they envision more for this offense. And a really funny thing is, I heard, and other people have kind of reported this. The word was that even like during the season in practice, as far as like processing the offense, making all the accurate throws, like Chandler was.
I'd also heard the same thing. Yeah,
and he was possibly like better than Max, but it was just when the lights would turn on Saturdays,
you couldn't keep Max off the field.
You couldn't keep Max off the field. He made big plays, and they had so much success, like throwing the ball down the field, that he made up for the fact that he was, a 65% passer for most of the season. So now you're getting kind of a more legit look at who Chandler is. My biggest concern for Chandler is he's kind of a small guy. Nothing you can do about it, but he's played, 4 games in his career. He's been hurt twice. The injury against Colorado last year was kind of a fluke thing. I mean, he was just trying to change direction. He ended up tweaking his knee. But at the moment, we'll see what happens with Jaden Rashada. Your backup QB is Josh Hoover, who, I mean, is a true sophomore from Rockwall Heath. Was a guy that was probably headed to like SMU or Indiana before Sonny got the job. And then, he kind of came over with the new staff and comes to TCU. I have confidence that they could add somebody in the spring or summer that is a veteran quarterback that could, give you an opportunity if Chandler goes down. But that backup quarterback is a glaring issue right now. They lucked out so much last year that Max decided to stick around, because this season what happened to them is what happens to most programs, which is Sam Jackson looked at who's in the room and kind of did the math and said, well, I'm going to go somewhere else. I mean, I'm not going to sit around here and be on the bench for a few years. So yeah, I mean, that'll be a big question all year long, but I think Chandler's set up to do this. One of the bigger questions too is, can you run the ball as effectively as you did last year? Because Miller's gone, Amari DeMercado's gone. You got guys like Amani Bailey, I would think is the most likely starter at the moment. And you're replacing some offensive line talent. So can you take pressure off Chandler and allow him to, settle into a good rhythm with this offense by being able to get things done on the ground, which is what Kendall Browse was known for at Arkansas. Of course, he had KJ Jefferson back there, who's kind of a bowling ball of a quarterback who can always take off and run, and that's not who Chandler Morris is.
Yeah, and then I think they got the transfer portal too. They added
they got Trey Sanders from Alabama. Yeah. And then they got Cam Cook coming in. It was a true freshman, but they
had another freshman this year too. I'm totally blanking on his name. People were excited about him. Let me double check and see the depth chart. Oh, Trent Battle. Is he?
Oh yeah, Trent Battle. Yeah, and he'll be a factor too. They used him as like a gadget guy, like kind of, catch the ball in the backfield. They didn't really use him in traditional run sets, but obviously like he'll be more in that, formation and more in that look this year because the two main guys are gone. But they used Trent in the receiving game, and he was really effective. So, yeah, I think he'll be a factor too.
I'll tell you what, I think even after because of the season they had, I think TCU is the most interesting team next year, because it's like, I think K-State will be right there, mostly because they keep a lot of the group around. Now that being said, we saw the same thing happen with Iowa State, right? Iowa State went 7-5 that one year after they were top 7?
Yeah.
Preseason top 7. And they finished like that. Now TCU, I think it's going to be a little bit different because a lot's changed for them, but really interesting offseason coming. I definitely think they have to add another quarterback for sure.
Yeah, they have to. They
have to. And I know right now it's like Chance Nolan, and I know Jaden Rashada is obviously available. And then Sam Eward, Brock Eward's son, is also available.
Yes. So and there's been some communication there, but I think they're kind of waiting to see what happens over the next week or so.
All right, Steven. It's very interesting. And then also Frogs basketball. I've said this a bunch. I think there's a chance. They look like I don't think they win the Big 12, but like if you asked me to pick like one of the most horrifying teams to play in a tournament setting, it's them, because they run you to death. They can shoot. They can run half court offense. They get a lot of steals. Jamie Dixon's tournament resume is not excellent, but like I think this group is. It's a damn good team. It's a damn good basketball team. So TCU Sports right now, way up arrow.
Yeah, their ceiling's high. I mean, I think if they shoot like they have the last week, then they're
God.
really they're really tough out. But one thing that's funny about that is so Shahade Wells was a transfer from UTA. They got him a couple of years ago, and it was it was like, hey, this is a big deal. He averaged like 16 a game at UT Arlington. And then he got hurt last season. This season, he hadn't really been a factor. And then in that Kansas game, he just suddenly goes off and has like 20, on 8 of 9 shooting. And so if he becomes somebody who can score along with, Mike Miles and Damian Ball, that's a big deal. But yeah, they have a system. Like I'll give Jamie credit. He really like that team has a lot of returners, but they're playing like a totally different way than they did last year. They're not like trying to just crash the offensive boards and suffocate you on defense. They're every chance they get to run, they're trying to get out in transition and make plays. So there'll be a fun matchup in the tournament for whoever they play.
Yeah, Jamie Nixon said to us on SiriusXM yesterday, he said, I want everybody, even our bad shooters, to shoot, because they still want offensive rebound, but they really do want to shoot. Yeah. Like they are a shooter. They can spread you out. They kind of remind me a little bit of the Baylor team from a few years ago, the way Baylor plays, just like the way they can spread teams out. So it's pretty exciting right now. All right, Steven, where can people find you and your work and all of its variety?
Yeah, I'm at Simcox Steven on Twitter. The show is at Locked On TCU. You can subscribe to Locked On Horned Frogs on YouTube. Also, wherever you get your podcast in its audio form.
All right, Steven Simcox, Locked On Horned Frogs. I'm sure we'll be talking to you as the off season rolls along.
Thanks as always, Josh. I appreciate it.